Do you ever feel like your sense of justice is cranked up to full volume? So loud it's impossible to ignore? Like you're walking around with an internal siren that blares at every unfairness, every hypocrisy, every outright attack on basic human rights? If you're an ADHD woman, chances are you're nodding along right now. Justice sensitivity isn't just something we care about, it's literally wired into us. And in times like these, when the news feels like a never ending stress cycle, that sensitivity can feel overwhelming. With Trump 2.0 looming large, the fear, the frustration, and the deep sense of this isn't okay are hitting hard. And let's be real, there are people who want us to stay frozen in that fear because an overwhelmed brain isn't a brain that takes action. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk about how to navigate this storm without burning out. Here's what we're diving into. First, why ADHD brains tend to have an intense justice sensitivity. Yes, there's actually some science behind it. Two, how to process the big emotions without shutting down or getting stuck in doom scrolling. And three, what effective action looks like so that you can protect your energy and make a difference. By the end of this episode, you'll walk away with a plan, a way to move through the fear, channel the fire inside of you, and take action in a way that actually works for your ADHD brain. Because staying in overwhelm isn't an option, and neither is staying silent. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Self-Loved ADHD Woman's Way podcast. I'm your host, Jen Barnes. If you're an ADHD woman entrepreneur, ADHD adjacent, or ADHD-ish, you've come to the right place. We'll dive deep into the unique challenges you face, from the inner turmoil to the outer obstacles. We'll blend neuroscience, IFS, and somatic healing, and explore practical strategies to help you navigate the world of entrepreneurship with ADHD with greater ease and effectiveness. I'm glad you're here. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. We're going to have an important conversation today, starting with talking about why right now is so hard for ADHDers right now in the world. And it's because we have a high sense of justice sensitivity. We're going to talk about why that is and how we can cope effectively now here with Trump 2.0. So let's get into it. I want to name that this is a hard time. This is a time like many of us haven't seen in our lives in the United States. And if you're outside of the United States, I suspect you're watching in complete and utter awe and probably even asking what the hell is going on over here. First, I want to assure you that not all of us are on board, and most of us are not on board with what's happening. But if you are someone who is feeling super triggered and struggling to get yourself to do stuff, finding yourself in scary research rabbit holes, dysregulated a lot, and then even having a hard time doing what you need to do, this episode is for you. And with ADHD, I want to share that we do have, it's well documented, it's been researched that we actually have a higher sense of justice sensitivity. And there's some reasons for that given how our brain is wired. So I want to start there before we get into what to do about it so that you can have some compassion for yourself, some understanding around why this happens and how this happens. So first of all, with ADHD, our brains take in an enormous amount of stimuli, more than other people. In fact, when we talk about ADHD, the diagnosis is attention deficit hyperactivity, which is actually inaccurate. It's we can pay attention. It's just that we have a hard time deciding where to place our attention because we have so much more information coming in. And so then we can feel bombarded more quickly than people who do not have ADHD. So that's one piece of it, but we don't miss much. And we catch things even that are beneath the surface, like things that maybe other people don't catch. It's kind of, I think about us with ADHD, how when you're in a conversation with someone and you're just like, come on, I know what you're saying already, right? Does that happen to you? I'm sure it has. And that's because we understand so much of what is being said before the words are even spoken, because we take in all of this other stimuli, all the other things happening in the conversation, all the other contexts and energy and body language and whatever else is going on, we take it in. And that's how we kind of know where things are going. But then we also read things that maybe aren't there, but a lot of times are there. So that then we can tend to freak out faster than other people might. So that's one way that we end up with this higher sense of justice sensitivity. We also are people with sticky brains. So this is actually why we can get PTSD more easily than people who do not have ADHD, because our brains are sticky. This is also true of autistic folks as well. And so because our brains are sticky, right, we can ruminate and get stuck on things. And that too can have us be more justice sensitive. I'm sure as I say this, you could, if I suggested you do this, you could probably think about a long list of times where there was an injustice or unfairness done to you or around you. I immediately, as I say that, have a long list of them. Even if I no longer feel super triggered by them, I feel a little bit in my gut thinking about some of them, because some of them weren't big enough to ever do trauma work around, but they're still there. And so because our brains are sticky, we remember all of these times of unfairness. So when there's unfairness or injustice going on in the moment or inequity, then it triggers all of that other stuff. So we end up with really big feelings, big reactions sometimes that other people may or may not exhibit. So that's another important piece to understand. Further, we tend to be an intense kind of folks, especially if you have the hyperactive presentation of ADHD. We tend to have this intensity and some all or nothing thinking. So when we see something, we're like, yes, this is what, this is all in, and we're all in. And it can almost become like a special interest for us to fight for equity and justice. And last but not least, we tend to have a high sense of morality. And I don't know that this is necessarily scientifically documented, like the reason. But what makes sense to me and my brain and the work I've done with trauma survivors in my therapy practice is that when things have been done to you that were not okay, when you've seen things done to people, when you've witnessed things that were not okay, you develop this sense of morality, this sense of like, that is not okay. That might be stronger than people who haven't had as many not so great things happen to or around them. And with ADHD, especially undiagnosed, but even diagnosed, a lot of us received a lot of inequitable treatment and were forced to mask so as to avoid said inequitable treatment. But if we couldn't mask, then you just took it. So then we have this strong need to make sure that things are equitable, things are morally done, because it feels safer for us. And there may be other reasons, but we've seen real woundedness around our ADHD, let alone anything else. There's actually is data that kids with ADHD are much more likely to be survivors of abuse, because the way our brains work, given modern society, can be hard for people to tolerate, especially parents and teachers and adults in our lives. So that we then have this sense of right and wrong that becomes very strong, that maybe other people's don't have quite as intensely as us, because again, our brains can get hooked on stuff. So that is my understanding as of this day, March of 2025, as to why we have this strong sense of justice sensitivity. There's not a ton of research that's been done on this. There is a study that shows we have it, but also a lot of this is just my clinical experience over the past 25 years. Well, clinical experience since 2008, and then general experience with working with people with mental health issues before that. It just comes from that experience and observation. So That's what I notice, but you might even notice, what is it for you that makes these causes so important? That might be something you journal about if you're curious. So I want to move now on to what to do about our justice sensitivity, what to do about the big feelings we're having right now. A lot of us are having, and maybe what to do around being in our fight or flight responses. We'll talk about that, but you may also be in your fight or flight and or shutdown response or going back and forth between the two. So this is a big conversation that I'm going to try and pack in here and share as much as I can. So the first thing to do is, believe it or not, before the big feelings happen, it's to be intentional about how and where we are taking in information. Because the thing is, some sources are, number one, not as reliable. And number two, their main focus is not just accurately depicting what's going on. Their main focus is viewership, like getting more people to watch them so they can sell advertising dollars. So, for example, our news, I should use air quotes, organizations in the United States, unless you're talking about NPR, which is public radio, everything else, our news channels are run by corporations, NBC, ABC, Fox, all that stuff, CBS, not CBS, sorry, CNN is what I meant to say, MSNBC, all of that is run by corporations. So it's important to understand that corporations have one main goal: profits. Their main goal isn't truth. Like the days of my youth when you'd watch the news and they were concerned about getting the story right. Now the concern is, how do we get people to watch? How do we hook people in and get more people to watch so that we can sell advertising dollars? So the priority there isn't truth, it's sensationalism. And what does that do to a nervous system? It triggers it. They want it to be triggered so that you then watch, which is the worst thing you could do if you're someone who's already sensitive to these things. So, step one, actually, before we get to the big feelings, is trying to mitigate some of it by being intentional about your news sources. There are some news sources that I find reputable. I've done some research. My first and foremost, it's my favorite, is 1440. They deliver just the facts on the three top stories. I like it. The stories are short because there's not opinion on either side. There's not judgment or anything. It's just literally what is happening. And you can subscribe to the 1440 newsletter. You just look for it, just Google it, you'll find it. So 1440 is a good source. Also, other reputable sources tend to be outside of the United States. The BBC is usually just focused on accurate stories. Same with The Guardian. So those two places can be just really like calmer ways to get the actual news. NPR is public radio and is probably the closest thing we have besides newsletters like 1440 that is relatively centrist. NPR does have some left leaning, so it's not completely centrist, so it's important to understand that. And a lot of the articles there are not as sensationalized. That's the other thing too. Reading over watching video is going to keep your nervous system calmer. And it's a way to not get so triggered. So that's why I'm suggesting all of these news sources that you can read. So those are my four go-tos. Though I got to tell you, as much as I love NPR, and P.S. I love The Current, which is part of Minnesota Public Radio in Minnesota. That is an indie rock alternative station, uplifting new artists as well as long played artists, and like with real hosts who get to choose what to play versus a corporation telling them. So anyway, this is an advertisement for The Current, but I got to tell you, The Current is amazing. So they are also part of NPR and Minnesota Public Radio. So as much as I love The Current, NPR is actually not my first go-to news source because it can be a little bit biased, and I'm left leaning, probably way farther than NPR is. However, if you're wanting a neutral news source, that actually isn't there. And it's got a little bit more of the, headlines that will draw you in because, again, it's public radio, so they need supporters, right? So there is a little bit of that. It's not like alt-right false, but it has been shown to be a little left-leaning. So step one is figuring out where you get your information, because I understand there's a desire to be informed, and Facebook is not actually a productive or accurate way to be informed. As much as we do that, I do that. Like, I have to catch myself. I'm like, okay, this probably isn't the best place to get my news on this situation, right? Even YouTube always isn't. As much as I love YouTube and I'll watch stuff on YouTube, I find after I watch YouTube, my nervous system is dysregulated. If I watch videos about what's going on YouTube, my nervous system isn't as regulated. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. But step one is being intentional about what information you're taking in and where. All right. Then step two, actually, I don't take that information in until I know I can take action. And we'll talk a little bit more about taking effective action a little bit later. But the reason that is because if you're just going to take in all this information, it can be super overwhelming and you can feel powerless in the face of it unless you can pair it with doing something actively, like writing your representatives or the people in government, whether that's the House of Representatives, Senate, your local government, whatever you decide to do. So I tend to pair taking in information with moments of when I can take action, even if it's a quick action. And I'll share more about that later. But then when you have the big feelings, here's how you can work with that. And you may have heard me talk about this in other episodes. So if you've heard it, this will be a great review to help reinforce the idea. The first thing you want to do is even notice that you are triggered into some big feelings. And how do we notice that? How do we become aware of that? Well, one of the easiest ways actually is to see how other people are responding to us. If they got big eyes or they look like they're shutting down because we're going off, that can be something. Sometimes people will say something to us. That can also be a clue. It might also be we catch ourselves behaving in a way, or we catch ourselves in a rant, right? We behave in a way that is aligned with being dysregulated or triggered into big feelings. And I'm not saying big feelings aren't warranted here, but we don't want to stay stuck in them. So the first step to not staying stuck in them is noticing what's happening. Like noticing the big feelings are coming up. And then we can acknowledge, oh yeah, there's a part of me feeling really angry right now, or a part of me feeling really triggered right now, and try to approach that with compassion and curiosity and see if you can get that. Does it make sense to you that there is something inside of you that's feeling triggered in this moment, that has some big feelings in this moment, anger, sadness, fear, whatever? And then validate that right now something inside of you is feeling these big feelings. Because quite frankly, it makes sense. The stuff that's happening right now is so intense. I would be shocked if people who are regulated, who are not in their shutdown response, would have zero feelings about it if you're being present with the information. So it's completely valid, and it's important that you validate that there are parts of you feeling these big feelings, because it's not wrong. Those feelings are trying to get your attention, like, yoo-hoo, shit's not okay right now. Do something, right? And it's like, oh yeah, thank you. Also, I got that. I know stuff is not okay right now, but thank you for the reminder. And then we can take a moment to work with those feelings. Maybe you choose to journal about them. Maybe you choose to connect with someone and talk about it. But the important thing here is that you work through the feelings. You write about the feelings as they are, but then also be working through them. That it's not just going to be a rant that you do nothing with, because otherwise you're just going to spin longer in them. Where we put our focus, that's where our energy goes. And so right now, if you focus only on the shit and the pain and the big feelings and the fear and the overwhelm, then that's where your energy is going to go. So as you're working through it, be mindful that it's not just a rant, but that you're also like, oh yeah, I get that a part of me is feeling this way. This makes sense. And actually let yourself like get through it, unpack it. Then it's important to regulate your nervous system. So, a lot of us right now are going back and forth, vacillating between our fight or flight response and our shutdown response, which, if you've heard me talk about nervous system regulation, you know what I mean. But basically, your autonomic nervous system has three main responses. One is a regulated state, and that's when you're ventral vagal, right? That's where you're safe enough to rest, digest, and connect. And we're not meant to be in that stage 100% of the time. However, the protective states, the other two, are meant for us to dip into to help us survive, to get to safety. And then we go back to that homeostatic state of ventral vagal, where it's safe enough to connect, digest, and rest. And that is essential because in order for our bodies to function optimally, in order for us to fight off infection, in order for us to digest, in order for us to be able to reproduce and have our reproductive systems working, in order for our body systems to work, we need to be in that ventral vagal space enough, or we start to notice problems. And the problems can start out short term, but long term, if we're stuck in our fight or flight and shutdown responses, then we can end up with chronic illness, like chronic problems. So it's really important that we figure this out. So, the fight or flight response is one that comes up when our nervous system, our brain, perceives a threat. The word perceives is important because while a bear chasing you is a legitimate life threatening piece of danger, like if you're in life threatening danger if a bear is chasing you, you're probably not in life threatening danger immediately if someone rolls their eyes at you or if someone makes a nasty comment on your Facebook post. So, but our nervous system doesn't know the difference. So it's important then that we become aware of when we're in our fight or flight response so that we can respond effectively. If you're there and you're not in imminent life-threatening danger, it's important that you regulate out of that so you can take effective action for the actual stressor that you're facing. And yes, while some of these cuts that the administration is talking about could be life-threatening if they happen, they are not imminently so. And so the tools that your body would automatically use to get out of life-threatening danger are not going to be effective for them right now. So that's why we want to regulate out. Further, when your nervous system, when your brain, your body senses that all hope is lost, you're not going to be able to get to safety, you will go into what's known as your dorsal vagal response, your shutdown response. You will completely shut down. And that will look like depression, disconnect, dissociation, not being able to get off the couch, all that kind of stuff is the shutdown response. And again, that's not particularly effective. In fact, that's actually what the administration wants right now. They want us in our protective responses because guess what? When you're in your protective responses, you can't take effective action. You cannot do anything to fight back. So they want that. So it's not productive right now for what's happening to stay stuck on those responses, nor is it helpful for your own health. So, or your life, like even just enjoyment of life. So we want to learn how to regulate out of those responses. Since I talked about the nervous system, wasn't planning on going that in depth, I do want to mention there is also the freeze response. People get really confused about the freeze response because they think it's the same as the shutdown response. The freeze response is actually between the fight or flight response and the shutdown response. If you look at a deer, right, you think of deer in headlights as the freeze response. They're not completely shut down. And in fact, their heart rate is elevated still, but their body is frozen. But they're still having some of that fight or flight energy. Otherwise, they would be lying on the ground. That's what the freeze response would look like in a deer. So the freeze response can also come up for all intents and purposes when we talk about regulating. I would experiment with using the tools for regulating from your fight or flight response. And you've heard me talk about those before. But basically, to regulate out of these responses, the shutdown response requires any movement at all, even visualizing movement. going for a walk, visualizing a walk. You get the idea. There's other things I teach in my programs and my nervous system regulation challenge, but for now, just know that just any movement at all. And then for regulating out of the fight or flight response, any movement with fluid breath. So it has to be, more fluid movement with breath, not any movement. Fluid movement with breath. This could be a yoga sun salutation or even a partial one so you can skip the whole chaturanga thing. This could be volcano breathing, which I've taught before, where you place your hands together in front of your heart. As you inhale, you reach your arms up overhead. As you exhale, you bring your arms down around by your sides and back to center, right? That comes from yoga calm. So you can do that a few times, but fluid movement with breath will help you regulate out of your fight or flight response. So once you have regulated out of your fight or flight response, then you will be ready to take action. But before we get there, I want to say one more thing. Staying stuck and spiraling about all this stuff that's happening is ruining your peace now. Because we don't know what's coming, but when we worry about stuff that's out of our control, we destroy the goodness that we have in this moment. Right now, many of us still have our freedoms. So take the time to enjoy it. Not that I'm like doom prepping for emotions or anything, but like anxiety about what could happen and things that are out of your control is just destroying your peace now. It's not changing anything. Your anxiety and worry, being in your fight or flight or shutdown response, does nothing to change the situation. It just makes you miserable now and has potential long-term consequences for your health, but also limits your ability to take effective action, which is what they want right now. Because if we're all stymied by fear and overwhelm, then they can just do what they want to do without our participation or objection, I should say. So focus on what is in your control. A lot of it isn't. You may have heard me say this before. Ezra Klein, who wrote the book Why We're Polarized, and I believe he's the founder of Vox News, Vox with a V. He has said that the problem is the news, 90% of the news we watch is federal or national news, and 10% is local. But when you think about our locus of control, really, it's flipped. We only have about 10% influence over what goes on the national stage, but 90% of our influence is locally. So consider that. Take action locally too, because that's where your biggest control, I don't want to say control, but that's where you can have the biggest impact is locally. So that's something to consider as we're moving to this taking action step. So like I said, I don't consume news from the reputable sources I mentioned unless I know I have time to take action. I sure as heck am not going to watch a YouTube video about what's going on unless I can take action. And so what is effective action? Effective action is something that actually impacts change. So probably posting on social media is not taking action. That's not doing anything. It's just people ranting and sharing their opinions. Half the time, people are in their own world and they're not reading what other people are writing anyway. And so that's not really an effective action would be attending a protest. Effective action is writing to your people in Congress, writing to other people that represent you, whether that's locally or federally or both. Those types of things are effective action. And so how do you do that? I will tell you two of my favorite ways. One is ResistBot. So ResistBot, you can go onto your browser and search on it. Basically, you text the word resist to 50409, and then you go through the prompts like, what do you want to do? Do you want to write? Do you want AI to help you? Whatever. If you want AI to help you, you have to know the bill you're talking about. So AI can help, but it will go through what you're going to do. And then you select that. And then you say the issue you're concerned about or what you want. And you can select your target, which you can write Congress, you can write Senate, you can write president, vice president, whatever, governor. You can write in who you want to target with the letter that you're creating. And then you go through steps to make sure that it's looking good, and you title it and then you send it off. And because ResistBot actually asks for your address and your zip code, it will figure out who your representatives are and send it to them. And so this is a nice, easy way. It literally takes a minute, two at most, to write in about any issue. So that is one that I really like because it's quick and easy and pretty not super dysregulating for your nervous system. One I also like is 5 Calls. It's an app that you can access on your phone. I do like 5 Calls. It's very left leaning, which I'm okay with, but not everyone will be. And it uses in pretty dramatic language. So it might dysregulate your nervous system if you read too much about it. But it will have a list of issues that you might be concerned about right now. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but you can click on one of them and it will tell you what's going on relevant to that issue. It shares updates if there have been any. And then you can move forward and it will list all of your representatives involved with this issue. So if it's your governor, it'll be that. If it's your senator, your United States senators, it'll be that. If it's your United States House rep, it'll be that. And what you do is you go in and it gives you a script of what to say to them. You'll just want to make sure you include your full address because then that makes them know that you're actually a constituent, like your vote, what you say rather is going to matter more to them because you have a say in whether or not they get reelected. So that's why it's important to share your address. But then it gives you a script you can read. You can obviously veer from the script. And then you can mark off, did you leave a voicemail? Did you talk to someone? How did that go? Were they unavailable? Like right now, my representative, Representative Omar, her inbox is full. So like I can't leave voicemail messages anymore, which is another reason I've been using ResistBot. But that's a way to very easily call your representatives and again, that takes just a couple minutes. So I do want to say that a lot of people can be scared about calling their representatives. What I want to tell you is no one cares. A lot of times, especially if you call after hours, you'll get their voicemail. But even if someone answers the phone, it's just their staffer. It's not like you're actually going to talk to Amy Klobuchar herself, right? Like, sorry, that's who one of my senators is. So it's not like you're actually going to talk to that person. You talk to one of their staffers whose job is to answer the phones and tally what you share. So it doesn't matter. Last night, I called my representatives, and when I was leaving a message for my other senator, Tina Smith, I totally kind of forgot what I was saying and bumbled a bit. And I just said, whoops, sorry about that. And I just kept going. I don't think they're going to care. I don't care. They don't care about that. They just want to know what your concern is so they know how to tally it. And if there's any good talking points that they might want to share with the person they work for. So no one cares. So just know that when you're choosing to take action. Other ways to take action, you can sign petitions. There's all kinds of things. My gosh. MoveOn.org is a big one. They have all kinds of petitions. All you have to do is add your name. So there are lots of ways to take action. You could volunteer. You could volunteer to help the unhoused community. You could volunteer to help the queer community. You could volunteer to help people that are being really horribly impacted by what's going on. You can also speak out. Like there's so much you can do. And if you're not sure, search on it. Find additional ways that you can speak up and speak out and really take action. Because unless you're able to take action, you're just going to feel powerless and it's going to fuel your fear. And then not only is that what they want, and we're essentially then rolling over and letting things happen, but also it's going to make it really hard for you to function in your life and in your business if you're an ADHD woman entrepreneur listening to this. So, all right, that was a lot to share. It was a big download today. I hope this was in some way useful for you. If it was, make sure you follow, or if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. I would love for you to follow and comment. Let me know what was useful. Let me know if you have additional questions. I really want to help with this because one of the ways that I take action as a coach and in my other business as a therapist is helping people deal with this. So that is another way I take action, is supporting. So please let me help you to help me do what I need to do as well. So thank you so much for being here. And make sure that you hit that subscribe or follow button, and I'll see you next time. Take good care.